Hello, and welcome to our web development tutorial series here on Turbo 360. In this tutorial, we're going to create a simple portfolio website using Node.js and the Express web framework, and that's going to be our server-side set of tools and frameworks. On the front end, the client side, we're going to use plain vanilla JavaScript as well as jQuery to make more client-side rich UIs as well as AJAX calls. So what is Node.js and Express? So Node.js is called a runtime that uses JavaScript on the server side, and Express is a web framework that leverages the Node.js runtime. JavaScript is used on the server for these frameworks and technologies, but JavaScript has traditionally been used on the front end, the client side, or the browser. So in about 10 years ago, 2009, Node.js changed all that by introducing JavaScript on the back end, which at the time was a highly unconventional and almost revolutionary concept. But in that intermediate period of time, it has grown very popular because you can use now JavaScript on the server as well as on the browser. So it cuts down on the overhead in terms of going back and forth and finding developers who know a variety of languages. You can now use JavaScript on both sides, creating sort of the full stack JavaScript developer, which is very popular today. So we will be using JavaScript as well on the client side, obviously, using vanilla JavaScript and jQuery for our browser coding. In this tutorial, we're going to create a simple portfolio website, again using Node Express and JavaScript jQuery. We're also going to include persistent data, so we're going to create a sort of local database so that we can create data that's persisted on a server so that we can support things like blog posts and projects and upload images and things like that. We're going to use a REST API to query that data so that we can fetch that data as well as add new posts and new projects and other kinds of data. So this is a beginner tutorial, but it's not for complete beginners in that if you've never coded before in your entire life, this might be a bit too soon. But if you've done some self-guided tutorials, you've watched a bunch of YouTube videos and of course some Udemy stuff, Udemy courses, and you've been studying by yourself for maybe 6 to 12 months, this is a good place to begin or continue because it'll help bring together a lot of concepts from seemingly unrelated areas. So if you know things like an array or variables and how to deal with loops, and maybe you've done some ES6 notation in JavaScript, things of that sort, this will be a good place to go to the next step, as we will start bringing a lot of concepts from different areas together to create a cohesive project. So hopefully that makes sense to you, and let's begin. So first thing we're going to do is make sure your environment is properly set up. So obviously we're going to need Node.js. So if you don't have Node.js, head over to nodejs.org and download the LTS version right here. That's called the stable version. Don't download this one right here, download the LTS. And go ahead and run the install scripts for that. And when you're done, open your terminal and type in the following, node-v, to make sure you have an up-to-date version of Node. So I am running the most up-to-date version, so make sure you have that as well, or higher. Along with Node comes another piece of software called the Node Package Manager, or NPM for short. So check your NPM version and make sure you have a version at this number or higher. And you should have your Node properly installed if you see these numbers or higher. Next thing we're going to need is the Turbo CLI. So the Turbo CLI is going to provide us a set of scaffolding tools and a connection to our staging environment so that we can deploy our projects to a staging server, which is all free, by the way, so that we can make sure everything works locally as well as it does on a staging platform, an actual server. So in order to make sure you have the Turbo CLI, you do sudo npm install -g turbo CLI. Now if you're running a Windows machine, I don't think you need the sudo. In fact, I'm pretty sure it won't work if you had sudo. But if you're running a Mac or a Linux, this is the exact command you're going to need to install the Turbo CLI. Now for Windows, some of the commands are not exactly the same. I'll try and remember which ones are different for anyone watching this video with a Windows machine. but I might miss one here or there, so please forgive me if that's the case, in which case you're going to have to Google your way through it. But right now, off the top of my head, I know that sudo is not necessary on Windows. So go ahead and do that, and when that's done, check your turbo version, which is done like this, and make sure your turbo version number is this number here or higher. If you've installed turbo previously from a previous tutorial perhaps, go ahead and run the install again just to make sure you have the most up-to-date version of turbo, which is this number right here. And last but not least, you're going to need an account on Turbo so we can deploy. So head over to turbo360.co, and again, it is free. So create an account on Turbo so that we can create a staging environment and deploy our project to our staging environment. So when that's done, let's go ahead and continue. So stay on Turbo, and what we're going to do is download a project template from the Turbo menu of project bases, and we're going to use that to create our portfolio project and reconfigure it. And as we go through it, we're going to explore how the pieces come together within a Node Express project to create a functional website with persistent data. So on the Turbo website, click on this nav menu link here called Gallery. And in the search bar, we're going to use a template called the Gallery, which is just a coincidence. It's not supposed to be the same name. And that's this one right here. And click on the Gallery template, and we're going to use this as our project foundation. So go ahead and download the source for that. And we're going to, download was blocked. Let's try it again. We want to allow. So go ahead and download the source. And in the Finder, in the download folder, let's change this to my portfolio and slide that over into our desktop or wherever you want to do your work. It's up to you. So I am going to open this up. And let's get rid of this zip file so that we don't get confused. And in your terminal, head over to the root level of that project. So my portfolio. And let's open this guy up in whatever text editor you want to use. I'm using Visual Studio Code. And here is the project, which is going to be our foundation for our portfolio project. So this is a very simple, sort of basic Node Express project structure. We're going to walk through the anatomy of this directory structure soon. But first thing we want to do is make sure everything works locally. So the one thing that we want to look at right now is the package.json file. And in any Node project, the package.json file is kind of your manifest file, kind of your table of contents for your project. This is where your things like the name of the project, the version, a couple scripts, and most importantly, the dependencies are declared in this file. So in order to run this project, we need to install the dependencies, and those dependencies are listed in the package.json. So what we're going to do to install it is, first thing we're going to do is remove this node modules folder. We're going to remove that. So click on node modules and remove that. So delete that. And then in your terminal or your shell, remember the node package manager is the software that's responsible for handling package and dependency installations. So in order to install the packages, we do npm install and press enter. And what this will do is it will go through, it will find the package.json file, and it will go through this dependencies list and go through each one of these and download each one into the project, into the node modules directory. So it will create the node modules directory. It will recreate it because we deleted it, and it will reinstall all these dependencies. So what I'm doing here is would be considered a clean install. I removed the node modules and I'm reinstalling all the dependencies, which is a good habit. You want to make sure you have a fresh installation. And then when that's done, we should have the node modules folder again, and we should be able to run the project. So now that it's done, the node modules folder showed up again, and all of our dependencies have been installed. So now we can run the local dev server to make sure that this project runs locally on our machine. So in order to do that, you do turbo dev server, and this will run a local server on port 3000 right here, localhost 3000. So we just copy that and we paste it into our browser. And now we see the project running locally on our machine. So this is what it's going to look like. This is what it looks like right now. We're going to use this as our foundational code base, and we're going to reconfigure all this for our own portfolio using our own projects and creating our own blog posts and things like that. So everything is working locally, which is great. So go ahead and turn off the server by doing Control-C. And if I reload localhost, it should be off because the server is turned off. So everything is working locally, which is good. So now what we want to do is make sure we have our staging environment also properly set up by creating a corresponding environment on our account on our Turbo staging environment, and then deploying to our staging environment so that what we see on the server looks like what we see on localhost, so that we can be confident that everything works on the staging as well as the local. So there's in order to do that, we go back to our account on Turbo and go to your account page, which should look like this. And on the left-hand sidebar menu, you should see a sidebar menu called Downloaded. And this will show you the projects that you have downloaded from the Turbo menu of project bases. And this is the one we did right here, the gallery. So what we're going to do next is we're going to clone the environment, because we need to create a corresponding environment on our account using the original foundation as our template. So here I'm going to call it my portfolio and press clone environment. And right now it's doing exactly that. It's taking the original base project and cloning the environment onto your account so that when you deploy your local source to your staging environment, everything matches up nicely. It's kind of like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. So now that this is all set to go, we're going to need these two pieces of information right here. Head over to your shell, your terminal, and do the following. You do turbo, log in, and then use the account that you log into the account that you used to sign up. And here's the account that I used. And then you do turbo, connect, and it's going to ask you for the site ID. So we just grab that right here. That's the site ID. And the API key, which is this guy right here. Just copy and paste that. And this will connect your local project, your local source code, to the staging environment that we cloned a few minutes ago. So we are now ready to deploy. So all we do is in our terminal, we do turbo deploy and enter. And this will send our local source code to our staging environment on Turbo so that we can run the same project on our server and make sure that everything looks the same on both local and our staging environment. And assuming that's the case, everything should be good to go. And now that the deployment is up, it gives us a staging link to our staging server. So we just copy and paste that into our browser. And here we have the site running on our staging server, same as we do on localhost. So this is good because now we can be confident that whatever we do on localhost, on our local environment, is the same as what would show up on our staging environment. and we can start developing our portfolio site. So this ends video 1. Thanks for watching. We have set up our project locally as well as on our staging server. Hopefully you got everything working. And in the next video, we're going to go through the actual project directory itself and start exploring how this project is assembled and how everything works in a Node-Express environment. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hello, and welcome back to our Node.js and Express tutorial series here on Turbo 360. In part 1, we downloaded the code base that we're going to use as the foundation of our portfolio site. And we got everything set up locally, made sure it ran properly on our machine, and then we deployed to a staging environment to make sure that it works properly on a server as well. So we got all that confirmed, so now we're going to move on to the actual code base, start digging through the architecture and setting up our own UI for our portfolio site. So let's get into it. So here I am at with the code base already open. I'm going to open up my terminal and make sure you're in the root directory of your project. And I'm going to run the dev server to make sure everything still works locally like we expected. So let's go ahead and open up localhost 3000, reload that. Everything looks good, so we're in business. So let's go ahead and turn off the server, and let's start digging into the actual code. So as I was saying in video 1, every node project revolves around the package.json, and we already covered this in video 1, so I'm going to move on to the next part, which is going to be the app.js file. Sometimes this is also called index.js on Node Express projects, but they fundamentally do the same thing. They create the application and then they configure a lot of its settings, like where to store assets, image assets, where to store CSS files, how to handle certain situations like routing and whatnot. And in a Node Express environment, we also install what's called middleware, and that's what's happening on line 15. So a lot of the configuration is done through what's called middleware. Now I'll explain middleware in a subsequent video, but for this video, the most important thing happens down here, starting on line 19, where we import what's called routes. And that's happening here on line 19 and 20. We're importing routes, and then on lines 24, 25, and 26, we're setting routes. So what are routes? So routes are files that handle requests, and a request is basically any time a person visits your website, that person is making a request. And those requests typically go to a route, and then the route configures a response and sends back the response to the browser, or it might be like an iPhone or something like that. And that's request routing. And those routes are maintained in these route files right here. And if you look closely on line 20, you'll see it says /routes. That means the actual route files are stored in a folder called routes right here. So if I expand this, you'll see two routes, page and vertex. That's right here, page and vertex. So those are the two routes that are primarily maintaining this entire website right now. So these route files are doing what I explained a moment ago. They are taking requests, generating a response, and then sending that response back to the server. Line 24 and 25 and 26, but most importantly line 24 is setting those routes. So a route is connected to what's called a path, and the path is basically the URL pattern in the browser. So www.etc.com, that's the path. And when you see a path like this on line 24, that's just a backslash. That stands for the home path. So this is sometimes called the root path, or the base path. These are the home paths. So the home page request is being handled by this page route right here. So if I run the dev server, and I visit the home page, the page.js route is the one that's handling this particular request. And that's happening right here, starting on line 5, going all the way down to line 34. Now there's a lot going on here, so we won't worry about all this right now. In fact, what we're going to do is set up our own route to handle home page requests. So let's go ahead and do that right now. Let's set up our own route. So let's go ahead and turn off the dev server. And let's, in our terminal, let's change directory to the routes folder, because that's where the routes are stored right now. And let's create our own route, which is going to become the foundation of our portfolio site. So we already have two routes called page and vertex. Let's create another one called main, and that's going to be our route. It's going to be the main route for the website. And let's go ahead and set this guy up. So open this up, and let's copy from the page.js route the first two lines, and then go back to the page.js route and go all the way to the bottom and grab that last line right here, module.exports. And now let's go ahead and set up our request routing. So we grab what's called the router, and then we set up a get handler. And basically requests come in a variety of forms. There's a get, there's a post, there's something called a put and a delete, but almost all requests are gets. So when you visit your browser and you hit your localhost 3000 or your staging URL, you are making a get request. So we're setting up a get handler, and this denotes the path. So this is going to be the home path. And in a Node-Express project, every route takes a function argument, and that's this right here. And the function argument takes its own two arguments, request and response. And this is pretty much exactly what they sound like. This is the request, the localhost 3000, and within that request comes some additional information. And then our job is to create an appropriate response to send back to the browser, or what's called the client. So let's go ahead and do that right now. We're going to send back a hello, excuse me, a hello message, and that's going to be our route right now. So now let's connect this route by going back to our app.js, and let's import that route. From the routes folder. And notice here you don't need to add the JS extension, it's automatic. And right here where we're using the page route, let's set up another handler for that. And I'm going to comment out the page route for now. Okay, so what we did was we replaced the original home page route with our own main route right here. And on the home page request, it simply sends back a hello string, and that's it. So let's go ahead and test it out. So go back to the root directory of the project, and let's do turbo dev server. And when we reload the home page, we should see our hello message right here. And that's good. That means we have taken over the route, the home page route, and now we control the UI. Obviously, we want to show a little bit more than this, right? So what we want to do is, instead of sending back a raw string every time, what we want to do is send back an HTML page, what's called a template. And so if you go back to the view app.js file, you'll see that the views directory right here is set as views, and that means all the templates are stored in the views folder right here. So originally, this home.mustache file, I'm just going to tell VS Code that this is HTML, is the original page that was loaded before we swapped it out. And so what we want to do is create our own template to load instead. Now you may be asking, what is this .mustache extension? Well, that stands for the Mustache templating engine. And what that means is this project is using the Mustache templating engine in order to render data dynamically inside of an HTML document. So don't let this throw you off. It's just an HTML page. That's the important thing. But there are special placeholders you may see here on line 7, on line 12, on line 4 that represent data placeholders that can be injected by the templating engine, in this case Mustache. So Mustache is one of a handful of templating engines that are very commonly used in a Node-Express environment. Another one is Handlebars. Another one might be is Pug. These are all templating engines that fundamentally do the same thing. They take an HTML document and they allow you to render data dynamically within that document. So we're going to take advantage of that today using the Mustache templating engine. So let's head over to the views directory and create a new template. Let's call it index, or no, let's call it landing. Actually, that's better. We want to create a new landing page. So landing.mustache, and again, make sure we're using the mustache extension. I'm going to cd back to the home directory just so I don't forget. And inside the landing.mustache template, of course it's empty because we just created it. Again, keep in mind this is just an HTML document. So we set up an HTML document here. I'm going to tell VS Code that this is HTML. And then let's just set up a very, very primitive HTML head tag and body tag and things like that. So now we have a head tag. Let's set up a body tag. And inside the body tag, I'm going to create a header 1 and say, welcome to my site. And in the main route, the main.js route, what we want to do now is render this landing template rather than the raw string. So that's pretty simple. All we do is instead of send, we do render, and we enter the name of the template landing that we want to render. So this is just going to grab the landing mustache template and then render that as HTML back to the browser. So what we can do now is we do turbo, we run the dev server, so turbo dev server. And then over here, we now have welcome to my site. So now what we're doing is we are rendering an HTML document rather than just a raw string, which is a lot more, we can add a lot more stuff now. So let's go ahead and turn off the dev server, so Control C. So now what we want to do is actually make use of the templating engine and its core purpose. So what that means is we can pass in data into this template, and the template can then render that data dynamically. So let's go back to the main.js and create a data object. And then I'm going to create a key called greeting and hello, welcome to my portfolio site. Okay, so now we have a data object which has one key value pair. The key is greeting, and that's the value, it's that string right there. So what we can do is we can pass in that data object into the rendering engine, and then the template, the landing template, can then render from the data rather than just hard-coded strings. So what we do here is the double curly brace, which is the syntax of the mustache templating engine. It's a pretty conventional syntax. And then notice here I'm adding the word greeting, which is the key from the data object rather than the entire string itself. And so now when I load the home page, I should see, well, hello, welcome to my portfolio site, which is the value that's plugged in for this key in the data. And so here we can just render the keys. We can just type in the keys rather than typing in the entire strings, which is a lot more concise. So this data object here, we can add as many key value pairs as we want. So if I add another one, in introduction, I am a web developer from California. I now have another key value pair that's being passed in through the data. So I can go back to my template and add more UI to render that introduction like that. And then when I reload, I see that. And that's how the templating engine works at a very minimal level. There's a lot more to it, which we want to explore in the next video, like how to render lists and images and things like that. But this is a very brief intro to the templating engine, in this case Mustache, And a lot of templating engines basically work this way. So for example, handlebars works pretty much exactly the same way, with a couple more nuances, which we'll get into in the next video. So, but before we wrap up on this video, let's go ahead and deploy one last time just to make sure everything is working on the server. So turn off your server locally, and we do turbo deploy, and we just want to confirm that everything looks the same on the staging environment as it does locally, so that we know everything we're doing is accurate. All right, the deployment is up. Let's go ahead and copy and paste that into our browser. And I'm going to open that in a new tab. And we see the same thing here on staging as I do on localhost. It's exactly the same, which means it worked. Everything is so far so good. So hopefully that's working on your end as well. And in the next video, we're going to continue working with the templating engine and rendering a few more types of data, a little bit more sophisticated data, and start building out the actual UI of our portfolio site. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hello, and welcome back to our Node.js and Express tutorial series here on Turbo 360. In the previous video, we set up our own custom main.js route, and we set up a template and did some basic rendering with the Mustache templating engine. So in this video, we want to continue that process by doing more rendering with a little bit more sophisticated data, things like arrays and images and things like that, and show how Mustache really works in a variety of situations. So let's go ahead and get started. So here I am in the root level of my project, and here I am in my terminal. I'm going to run the server, the local dev server, and make sure everything is still in proper working order. So let's head over to localhost 3000, and everything still looks good, so we're all set to go. So turn off the server, and let's dive back into the code. So here we are in the main.js route that we set up in the previous video. So here it is right here, and we have a template for this as well called landing. So that's right here. Okay, so here's our template that we set up, and I'm just going to tell VS Code this is HTML. And you'll see that we have two values being rendered here, which are pretty simple, just strings. So there's a lot of other situations we have to be considerate of, like how do you render an array, how do you render images, things like that. So let's go ahead and do an array first. So going back to our main.js file, we have our data object, and I'm going to add a new key called languages, which is going to be an array of programming languages that I know. So that's going to be an array of JSON objects. Let's go with name, JavaScript, and then another key for years of experience, JavaScript. So, and then let's add two more languages. So let's do next is Python, and that's about 4 years. And let's do Swift, and that's also 5 years. Okay, so here we have a very simple array of programming languages. So now in order to render that in the template, we head over back here, and let's create a heading here, H3 programming languages. Let's create an ordered list. And so inside of an ordered list, we want to render a list item tag for each programming language, right? And this is basically what's going to be rendered in the loop. So what we want to do is create a double curly brace, the Mustache templating syntax, and languages is the name of the key that holds the array. But since we're looping through the array, we add one more item before the word. We add a hashtag, which indicates to the Mustache templating engine that this is a loop. And then to close the loop, we create another placeholder, and with this time, instead of hashtag, we do a slash. And basically everything inside represents the loop. So Mustache will loop through the languages array. that we pass through and render whatever we tell it to in here. And inside each loop, the templating engine has access to the data object inside the loop. So that has a name and a years key. So I can do name and then comma years of experience. And you'll see inside we're just using the same templating syntax. So we can now test if this works by going back to the shell and running the dev server. And then head over to localhost, and we have our array of programming languages, all three of them, without having to write literally all three inside the actual HTML, which is nice. So what we can do now is head back to the main.js, and we can add another language. Let's say I'm picking up a new language, C#, and let's say I've done that for about a year. I can just add that, and then this will show up in the array rather than adding that manually in the HTML, which is pretty convenient. So that's how you handle loops in the Mustache templating engine. Another common scenario is an image. So let's say we want to add a profile image to this. So I'm going to add another key on top. Let's call it image profile. And really what this should be is a string linking to the image on the web, preferably your server, which is what we're eventually going to do. But right now we're just going to grab an image. I just did a quick Google image search of Bill Gates. Obviously you can do whatever you want. And I grabbed this image, and this is the actual image. I guess this is his Twitter profile icon. And what we want is this actual image link right here. And we want to pass that in as the value of this key. And then we have image profile. And then what we do in the template is we just create an image tag. That's a little hard to explain right now, but it's for image tags or image URLs, we want to use triple curly brace instead of double curly brace. The short of it is anytime we're rendering an actual HTTP link, generally speaking, it's better to do triple curly brace than double. And that's not a hard rule. It'll actually work fine with double, but a triple is better in this scenario. So if I reload, you'll see a big picture of Bill Gates and all the other content that we added on the bottom. So yeah, that's it. So another feature of the Mustache templating engine is it enables us to render blocks of HTML. So if you take a look at what we have here, we're really just rendering strings, raw strings, one at a time, which is pretty easy and pretty light. But sometimes you want to render a huge chunk of HTML. This happens a lot when you have a UI that gets reused in multiple pages. So for example, like a footer or like a nav bar, those things show up on multiple pages, and by and large they look exactly the same every time. So whenever that happens, you want to use a partial, something called a partial, which basically just allows you to render a chunk of HTML. So let's say here on the bottom I want to add a contact form. Let's do that right now real quick. So right here in the bottom, let's create a form, and let's add an input. Email, and then let's add a submit button. Submit. Now, let's say you want to have a contact form like this show up on every page of your portfolio site because you want to make sure that anyone who's interested in working with you can get a hold of you real easily. So what you want to do then is create a partial out of it. And if you notice in the views directory, we already have a partials directory. So what we can do is we can cd into the partials directory, and let's create a new partial called form, and it is a mustache template, right? So you want to maintain the .mustache extension. Head back to the root directory because it's easy to forget that. And then what we want to do is copy this chunk of HTML and simply paste it in the form. And this effectively becomes a block of HTML that we can reuse anywhere on the site via the partial syntax. So what we do back in the landing template is instead of instead of using this HTML form all 4 lines, we can get rid of this and just type in form. But to indicate that this is a partial, we add a little caret right here. And this tells Mustache that this is a partial rather than just a raw piece of data. And so it'll render a huge chunk of it, or not a huge chunk, but a chunk of HTML that matches with the name of the text you put in right here. So it'll look for this form.mustache, and whatever the HTML contents are, it will render all the contents right here. So if I run the dev server and try it again, I still see the form. And if I want to remove that for a particular page, I can just remove the partial, and then it'll go away. And so yeah, and so that's how you render a block of HTML in the Mustache templating engine. So we'll be using pretty much all of these features and a few more as they come up as we do our work. But this is a pretty brief intro to the Mustache rendering engine and how it works. It'll cover most of our scenarios, and so in the next video, what we're going to do is start using these concepts to build out our UI using most of these concepts. But before I wrap up this video, I'm going to do a quick deploy and make sure everything works the same on staging as it does on local, just so that we're confident that everything will look the way we expect it to look. So I like to finish all my videos with a deploy because that guarantees that ensures that what we're doing is accurate on the server. So obviously that's more important than localhost. All right, the deployment is up. Let's go ahead and test it out. So we copy and paste the staging link, and here we have the same exact thing on the staging link as we do on localhost. Everything looks the same. The partials are working, got the array looping through perfectly, got the image, everything looks great. So so good. So we're in business. Hopefully you got that working on your end as well. And yeah, in the next video, we'll start building out our own actual custom UI for the portfolio site itself and start making it look a little bit more polished and a little bit more professional. So hopefully you got everything working. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hello, and welcome back to our Node.js and Express tutorial series here on Turbo 360. In the previous video, we explored the Mustache templating engine in a little bit more detail. We explored how to render various data types like arrays and images and things of that sort, as well as partials for chunks of HTML. So in this video, we're going to optimize that process a bit and make things a little bit more modular and start building out our UI for our actual site, our actual portfolio site. So let's go ahead and get started. So here I am at the root level of my project, and I'm going to run the dev server and make sure everything is still working properly. Let's head over to localhost and see how it looks. Okay, great. So here's how everything looks at the end of the last video. We are in good working order. So I'm going to turn off the server and open up the code. So here is the main.js file where we set up the routes, or the route, and this renders the landing template. So let's open that up. And here's the template file where we are rendering our landing page or our home page. So okay, great. So if we go back to the main.js, you'll see that the data object right here, starting on line 5, is what gets fed to the landing template and renders so that it can render the data dynamically. But if you think about it, in a more complicated project or a more filled out project, this can get pretty big, the data object, and you might have multiple routes. In all likelihood, you're going to have multiple routes, multiple pages, and if they all have their own data object, this route file can get very, very cumbersome very quickly, and that's not very good organization. So what we're going to do is move this this content, this data over into its own file. Now, luckily, the Turbo ecosystem provides a very convenient mechanism for us to do that. Basically, the way it works is that every template has a corresponding JSON file associated with it where this data, the data for that template, can be extracted to. You don't have to have a JSON file for it, but if you do, the rendering engine will use it. And those JSON files are stored here in the pages directory. So if you open this up, you'll see 3 JSON files, blocks, global, and home. And these JSON files correspond with templates in the views directory. There's a blocks and there's a home. Don't worry about the global for now, but we will get to that in a few minutes. But also, more importantly, notice how there are pages here, templates here, that don't have config files here. So they don't have to have a config file. But if they do have one, what happens is the rendering engine will grab the JSON config file and then feed that data to the template on the render. And that happens automatically in the Turbo ecosystem. So we want to take advantage of that here. So what we want to do is create a separate JSON file for this template. Now, an important caveat is that the JSON config file must match the name of the template. So home.mustache matches with home.json. Blocks.mustache matches with blocks.json. So that means we have to create a landing.json to match with this template right here. So let's go ahead and do that. So in your terminal, cd to the pages folder, and let's create our landing.json. And then cd back to the root directory. Now, if we open the landing.json, you'll see obviously it's blank because we just created it. But if you open another JSON file like home.json, you'll see that it's just a JSON file. It's just key value pairs, just like we have in the data object in the main route. So if we go back to the main route, we can just grab this data object and copy that and then paste it inside the landing.json. And this can be where we store our JSON data, our template data. Right now we're getting a lot of warnings because the actual JSON format must be in a very strict JSON format, which is pretty simple. It basically means that all these key value pairs must be in double quotation marks. So go ahead and make this adjustment, and then we can go ahead and start using it. We have a bunch of single quotation marks here, so I'm going to do a quick find and replace. So you do Command Option F, and then you do a single quotation mark, and then a double quotation mark here, and then do a quick replace all. Make sure you do replace all. And that'll take care of all the single quotation marks. And then let's just wrap up with these, and that should take care of that. Okay, so now we have the data for the landing mustache template stored in this landing.json file. And so what that means is we can go back to the main route and we can now get rid of this data from here and just instantiate an empty data object instead. And the way it works is when the rendering happens, the render will look for the landing.json template, config file. And if it locates that file, it will insert it into this data object underneath the page key. So it will be like this, like that. And the page key will store the JSON contents from this config file. So if I run the dev server, and then load the home page, it'll look like it didn't work because we lost all the contents except the partial, and the partial is not part of the data object, so this is expected. But it actually did work because remember, the page data is now stored in the page key right here. So if I open up the landing.mustache, these keys are no longer present in the data object. It's going to be underneath the page key, like that. And so now we're referencing the page key of the data object. And if I reload, everything is back to the way it was. And so it actually did work. So you just have to remember that the data, the page data from the config file is stored in the data in the page key automatically by the Turbo environment. You don't have to use it. We can just remove the landing JSON config file if we want to, and we can just create our own data if we want. So it's up to you. But I find it to be very, very convenient because this creates a much more modular approach to maintaining the data. If you look at the landing.json, here we have only JSON data, and in the main.js route, we only handle request routing. So it's a very good, clear separation of concerns. And this is really how you should maintain your projects. So I find this to be a useful tool. Now, one thing I left out is this other JSON file called global.json. So if I click on this, you'll see there's a series of key value pairs in here already. Now, the global JSON has a special consideration. It's not for a single page, it's for all the pages, hence the name global. So what happens is that the Turbo environment will fetch the global configuration file for any rendering command that we do. So if we set up 10 routes here, the global JSON will be fetched for all 10 routes, and it'll be the same file each time. The reason why this is useful is because there are a lot of configuration options in a website that should apply to every single page. So rather than having several page configuration files with repeat data, it's better to have one global configuration file which handles all of them. So the Turbo system will fetch the global for every render command and then add the global page to the underneath the global key like so. However, this doesn't happen automatically. We have to use what's called a context object to get the global data. And the context object is provided to us again by Turbo, which will provide the global data in addition to a couple other things like your site ID and things of that sort. So in order to grab the context object, that is binded to the incoming request object right here underneath the context key. And this data context key has a global object associated with it, assuming you have a global JSON file in here. If you don't, then it won't be there. So what we can do now is go back to the landing.mustache and reference that global object. If I want to create a title tag, I can reference the global key and then the site name key within that. And if you recall, inside the global.json, there's a site name key and it's called the gallery. So if I click on here, this title should read the gallery. And if I reload the home page, before I do that, it's important to know the title shows up over here where it says localhost 3000. So if I reload that, it now says the gallery. And that's coming from the global JSON configuration file. And if I want to change that, I just simply change the JSON file. So my portfolio. And then reload, and now it says my portfolio. And that's good because this should really be populated on every page. So that's why it should go in the global rather than the individual home page, or in this case, the landing page JSON. So that's how these configuration files works. It's important to understand right now at this juncture, we've only made the changes locally. So these are not deployed on the server. So in order to make sure these are persisted to the server, we have to update the server config files with our new data. So in particular, we made two changes. We created a new config file right here, and we updated the global JSON. So to update the staging server with those changes, it's pretty simple. You do turbo page, and then the name of the config file. And this will update the staging environment with the configuration. And then you do the same thing for a global. And now the staging environment has these changes reflected on its environment. So now we can do turbo deploy. And when this goes up, those changes should be reflected on the staging environment as well. So hopefully we'll see that once the deployment is up. And that's it. So the staging deployment is now up. Let's copy the URL and open that up in our browser. And here we have the same UI on the staging environment. We have the title here. This is a cached image, so don't worry about that. You probably don't see that on your end. And the important thing is that everything we see on local is now showing up on staging. And so it worked. And so that's really good. Another caveat about this page configuration feature is that you don't have to deploy the entire project every time you want to make a change to a configuration file. So that's pretty useful. For example, if I want to change the landing JSON, let's say right here where it says hello, my name is welcome to my portfolio site. Maybe I want to change that to hello, my name is Bill. Now we changed it over here, and rather than redeploy the entire project, we can just change the page. So we can do turbo, page, and then that's landing. And then that will update the staging environment with the new configuration file. And then hopefully we'll see the change right here. And that's on staging. This is important to note. This is no longer on localhost. So we just changed the staging configuration that quickly and easily by updating the config file rather than redeploying the entire site. So this makes life a lot easier. This also works for global and really any of the pages. So it's consistent across all the pages. And yeah, it's a convenient way to update your content on your site without redeploying every single time. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully you got everything working on your end. And in the next video, we're going to actually redesign all of this. We're going to tear all this down and start building out the actual UI of the project and making it look more professional and more sophisticated. So that's it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hello, and welcome back to our Node.js and Express tutorial series here on Turbo 360. In the previous video, we took advantage of a Turbo feature which lets us extract the data for each template into their individual config files so that our code is much more modular and better organized. And we also explored how the global configuration works and how the data is sent to every template in a render command. So we're finally ready to start building out our own custom UI. So we're going to start building out our actual HTML and UI on our site and start creating a nice looking portfolio website. So let's get into it. So here I am in the root level of my project. I am going to run the dev server as I usually do. So turbo dev server. And just make sure everything looks the same on localhost as it did before. So here we are on localhost 3000. Everything looks good, and we're good to go. So let's turn off the server. Actually, I'm going to keep it on and reload the home page. Now, most Turbo templates that you download comes with a series of what's called UI blocks, basically reusable blocks of code, chunks of HTML that you can reuse to build out your UI so that you don't have to build out the HTML and CSS from scratch, which can take a long time. And we're not going to do that in this tutorial because that would be more of a design tutorial than a Node Express tutorial. So we're going to reuse a lot of the blocks that come with this template to sort of put together our landing page, kind of like you would use Lego pieces to put together something from Legos. So if a Turbo template comes with a set of UI blocks, that would come in the blocks route. So on the home route, you just do /blocks, and you'll see a series of UI components that comes with this template that we can just mix and match to make our own site. And so we're going to use these to create the landing page of our portfolio site. And if you actually look at the code, it'll make a lot of sense how this is put together. If you look at the app.js route, you'll see on the bottom it says app.use/blocks, and that's the path we're accessing right now. And that goes to vertex router.blocks. And the vertex routers are imported right here from the routes directory, so /routes/vertex. So if you open that up, /routes and then vertex, you'll see there's a blocks router here on line 6. And if you scroll down to the bottom, you'll see the blocks router simply renders the blocks template with the context data object from the previous video. And if you look at the blocks template, here's what we have. And so it's just using everything we studied in the first 4 videos of this series. So there's nothing new here. So we're going to use this to build out our UI. And it may look like there's not much going on here. There's only 29 lines. But if you look closely, it's just a series of partials that are thrown together, and each one of these partials represents its own block of UI. So here on line 14, you'll see there's a hero partial, and on line 12, you'll see there's a header partial. So if I open up the blocks page again, all the way on top, you'll see here's the header partial. So if I actually remove that and reload, you'll see that it goes away. Obviously we don't want that, let's put it back. And if I take the hero partial out and I remove that and then I reload, these are called hero sections. These 4 hero sections will be removed, and it goes right down to features. And then it'll move on to the features partial. And that's how it's organized. And these are partials, which means they reside in the partials directory. So here is the partials directory. And there's actually a subdirectory in this called blocks. So if we open this up, you'll see that there's a series of partials. Each one of these corresponds to a partial in the blocks page. So we have hero, hero, features, features, gallery, gallery, so forth and so on. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. And so these are all partials, just like we studied in one of the earlier videos. So what we're going to do is take this whole thing and superimpose it onto our landing page and sort of rebuild it using whatever blocks that we want instead of everything at once. So first thing we want to do is highlight the entire thing and copy it. So Control A and then Control C. Let's head over to our landing template and let's go ahead and remove all this stuff. And let's replace it with the blocks. And everything from lines 14 to line 22, let's get rid of all of those. Now the reason we leave this other stuff behind is because these aren't really blocks. These are actually partials that come with the template that should stay with the template no matter what. So there's a head partial, and you'll see that these are not in the blocks subfolder. So there's a head partial right here, and a header 2 over here, and a footer over here, and a scripts import partial right here. So those are not in the blocks folder, which is why we're leaving those behind, because we're gonna use these. So if I reload the home page now, you'll see there isn't much here other than a footer. It's hard to see, but there is the header, and that's it. The header's dark text, so you can't see it against this black background. So what we want to do is now look at the blocks template, and we want to restore the hero partial, but we want to grab the actual raw HTML. So we open up the blocks, and then we grab the hero partial, and we simply copy the entire thing, and we head back into the landing template, and we paste it all that HTML right here, where the partial originally was in the blocks mustache template right here. We just paste the actual raw HTML. And this will reinsert the hero partial in its HTML form. So if we reload the home page now, we will see hero sections. But notice how the images aren't showing up. We have all the text content and some of the CSS styling, but we don't have any of those images that we saw in the actual blocks page. If I open a new tab, we can compare it directly. And you'll see that the images are no longer there. That's because we didn't update the corresponding JSON config file. So let's go ahead and do that. So what we want to do is open up the pages folder, and the blocks JSON has a hero section all the way up on top, which corresponds with the hero partial. So we could actually just copy that section from the configuration file and then head over to the landing JSON, our page, and paste that entry right here like that. So now the JSON file for the landing page corresponds. It matches up with the JSON configuration for the blocks page. And so that when you render the landing page, these references right here, where it says page.hero and then image1, page.hero and image2, they will have the data piped in right there. So if I reload the home page now, we should see it show up the same as we saw originally on the blocks page. So we simply moved over a series of UI components from the blocks page over to our landing page. It's pretty simple. Really the only tricky part is keeping track of what's what. And now we simply need to decide which one we want to use. So it's really, you can pick any one of these, but I'm going to pick the bottom one right here, the very last one, because the way I see this taking shape is we can put a profile icon over here on top and a greeting message down here and a short brief intro down here. I think that will look pretty good. And we'll probably end up removing this button altogether. So let's go ahead and do that. So I am going to head back to the landing.mustache template, our template. And the fourth section is the one we want. That's the bottom hero section. So this is the only one that we want. So everything else we're going to just remove up until here. And these blocks we can just remove. And now we only have one left behind, which should be the fourth one, the last one. And here we are. So here's the top of the page, here's the header, and then the remaining hero section that we left behind. And then don't worry about the nav bar yet. We'll take care of this. Obviously, we need to create a logo that's more bright so that it's easily visible. And we'll probably end up removing these nav bar menus altogether. So we now have the section that we want, and the JSON data that it's referencing is page.hero.img4. Let's change this to img background, because it's no longer number 4, right? Because we don't have 4 images, we only have img background. So let's head back to our landing.json file. And instead of img4, let's change that to img background. And let's get rid of 1, 2, and 3 because we're not using those. So we can just leave that behind. And if I reload the home page, it looks the same. So we didn't lose any data. We actually just cleaned it up a little bit. And let's extract all of this over into the template as well. I'm sorry, the config file. So on the landing.json right here, within the hero section, we want a new key called greeting. And then we will say this is welcome. And then introduction. My name is Bill. I am a full stack software developer. I am excited to work on your project. Okay, so we added some new key value pairs in the hero section. So we go back to our landing template, and instead of this hard-coded text right here, we simply do page. Remember, it automatically inserts the data in the page key. The page has a hero key, which is the one we were just on, and then this is the greeting. And then we do the same thing down here. That would be page, and then hero, and then introduction. And let's reload that. And here we have welcome. My name is Bill. I'm a full stack software developer, except I spelled it wrong. I spelled a lot of things wrong. Let's take care of this. So we go here and we go back to the hero section. I am a full stack software developer. I am excited to work on your project. Okay, better. And then let's get rid of that get started button. I don't think we really need that for our portfolio site. And so we got rid of that. And then let's fix the spacing a little bit. I think there's a little bit too much space between this header and this introduction. So let's go back here, and this is using Bootstrap 4, which has a series of classes that handle spacing. And this MT4 right here stands for margin top 4, which is creating this amount of space over here. So if we just dial that down to maybe 1, it'll shorten that space. And maybe we want actually 0 here. Okay, looks like that's as far as it's going to go. Okay, and so let's go with that for now. And okay, let's see here. What we're going to do next is we're going to add an image, a profile image, and our own background image, right? So we want to use our own imagery rather than just what comes stock with the actual template when you download it. So it's pretty easy to do that, but before I actually show you the console for that, be aware I did prepare images for this purpose. I downloaded this background image right here, as well as this profile image. And so I'm going to use these. You can download these from the course materials of this course, or of course you can also just grab your own images. So it's up to you. So I'm going to go ahead and use these. I grabbed these from Unsplash, and that's this right here. And these are just free unlicensed images you can use, and they're pretty good. They're pretty high res and very nice looking. So unsplash.com if you want to use that. So let's go ahead and create our own images. So the way you do that is you head over to your account on Turbo and you access the admin console for this project. So head over to your account, click on Sites, and this is the project I set up for this particular series of videos. So click on Manage, and then over here on the left side you'll see a series of menu options. The one that we want is File Storage. So you click on that, and we can upload files here, images and whatever else we want to use for our site. So we click on Upload File, and I'm going to upload the BG image. And while we're here, I'm also going to upload the profile. Okay, and now these are now stored on the Turbo image hosting platform. And so we can click on these two. And the reason why we're storing these on the hosting platform rather than bundling them into the actual image, into the actual file system of the website, is because this system provides us a series of tools that makes it very easy to scale and crop the images. So for example, this image right here, if I want to create a bigger version, I simply go to the end of the URL and I do equals s and then 2048. And the number 2048 will indicate how big the image will be when I reload the URL. So I just created a much bigger version simply by updating the URL rather than uploading multiple versions of the image, which makes life a lot easier. So for example, this profile, we're probably not going to use this image size. We're probably going to use a smaller image size, so we can do equals s and maybe 220, which gives us a smaller image. And then if we want to guarantee that it's a perfect square, which I do a lot, we simply append a -c, and that'll give us a perfect square crop. It'll be a perfect 220 by 220. And so that's why we're using this image CDN. Makes life a lot easier. So we're going to grab this right here, and we're going to make that the image background in the landing.json. So let's head back to the landing JSON and then img background, and remove that, and then paste in the image we just uploaded. And then if you look at the landing mustache template, you'll see that the scaling parameter is already there. So that's nice. So we don't have to worry about the size. It'll take care of it for us. So now if I reload the home page, I now see the desktop background that I just uploaded. And so now it's more customized, it's more personal to the portfolio site that we want to use or create. Now here is the profile image. So let's go ahead and copy that and go back to landing.json, and then let's create a new image entry. So img profile, and then let's paste in the image from the platform, and then let's add an image entry in the template. So head back to the landing.mustache, and then over here above the header 1 greeting, let's do an image tag, and then page.hero.img profile. You may recall from one of my earlier videos in this series that images and any kind of URLs should be rendered in triple curly brace. And let's do s equals, let's try 160, and then -c to guarantee that it's a perfect square. Actually, let's make that 320. Okay. And then let's head back here and let's see how that looks. Okay, so here it is showing up. It's obviously too big, right? So what we want to do is to go back here and update the image with a style attribute and make sure the width is 160, so that it's never going to be bigger than that. And then if we reload, now we have a more reasonable size for the profile image. The reason I did 320 to 160, so if it renders in 320, it usually comes out looking a lot better if it's a 2-to-1 ratio in terms of the rendering size versus the actual size, or I should say the actual size versus the rendered size. That's just something I've noticed with a lot of trial and error. It's not terribly important, but that's why I did it. So one more thing we want to do here is create a border radius 50%, and that'll give us a nice round icon. And I'm also going to work on some of this spacing. There's a little bit too much vertical space here, so in that welcome here, that's the margin top 4. We're going to dial that down to margin top 1. And then the image, I think, should have some more spacing on top. So the image should have a class of margin top 4. Basically, I just move the margin to the next item on top. And now I think we have a very nice sort of greeting section, a hero section for our portfolio site. And yeah, so it's starting to look a little bit more slick, a little bit more professional. So now what we're going to do next is we're going to pick the next block. So if we head back to our blocks section, page, excuse me, if we scroll down, we can see here we have a features section. This is more for product features, not really for a portfolio site. But then we reach the gallery. So let's go ahead and import this, and this is going to be replaced with projects. So we want to showcase our projects in our portfolio website naturally. So in the blocks template, so the blocks mustache file, we have features, which we skipped entirely, and then we want to render the gallery. So let's head over to the gallery block right here inside the blocks folder, and let's copy all of it. So highlight the entire thing, copy it, and then head over to the landing template And underneath the section that we just worked on, let's create another entry and paste in the gallery that we just copied from. And these are the gallery sample gallery projects that we just copied from. Okay, well, I'm just looking real quick at the spacing here. Yeah, the spacing is off by 1. I'm just going to fix the spacing real quick. This is a small pet peeve of mine. Okay. All right, great. And now don't forget to update the corresponding JSON file. So if we look at the blocks.json, you'll see we have a features section, which again we skipped entirely. But then we have the gallery section right here. And so we want to copy the gallery section from the blocks.json. And then we want to move that over into our landing JSON so that all the proper data has been shifted over so that these images can be rendered. So now if I go back to the home page right here, I can reload this, and now I have the hero section with the greeting and the brief intro, and then I have the gallery that we just moved from the blocks over into here. And this will become our portfolio showcase section. So let's go ahead and well, we'll start manipulating this in the next video. But our home page, our landing page, is starting to take better shape now. In the next video, what we're going to work on is making sure that this content is dynamically rendered. In other words, we want to make sure that we can add projects and remove projects or even change projects without having to redeploy the entire site. And so that requires some special configuration that connects to a database, which we'll start doing in the next video. So obviously you want to be able to add projects to your portfolio and eventually remove projects as you get better and better. And there are easy ways to do that using this turbo system. So that's it. Let's go ahead and deploy the changes. Now don't forget, we made some changes to the config files. Most notably, we made changes to the landing config JSON. So don't forget to do turbo page and then landing, and this will post the changes to our staging server such that everything will be reflected on the staging environment, and then we can do turbo deploy, and assuming that this works, our home page should now look like this when on staging. And we will take care of these this issue with the logo and whatnot. We'll take care of that in the next video as well, so don't worry about that. Okay, great. The deployment is up. Let's go ahead and check it out. So we just copy the staging link, and I'm going to open a new tab. And here we have the same thing on the staging URL as we do on local, which means everything worked. So now our site is starting to become more customized, looks a little bit more polished, and it will soon be fully customized for our own portfolio. So hopefully you got all of this working, and I'll see you in the next video. Hello, and welcome back to our Node.js and Express tutorial series here on Turbo 360. In the previous video, we started setting up our custom home page, our UI, using a series of pre-installed blocks that came with a template to give us a quick, nice-looking, and professional-looking site. In this video, we're going to continue that process, but we're going to use more dynamic data from the built-in database, which will give us the ability to create more dynamic data to render on the homepage, things like projects, blog posts, things of that sort. So let's go ahead and get started. So here I am in the root level of the project right here. I'm going to run the dev server as I usually do and make sure everything is still properly working. And let's head over to localhost 3000. So here I am in localhost 3000. Everything looks good. This is what we set up last time, this hero section as well as this gallery section. Now in this video, we're going to work on this gallery section. We're going to change this to projects, and then we're going to have these fetch from a local database that comes pre-installed with these turbo templates. So it's pretty nice. We don't have to set up a separate database server. We don't have to establish a database connection manually. It's all sort of done for us out of the box. Now there's no reason why you couldn't do that, but for the sake of simplicity and speed, we're going to use the built-in database. So let's go ahead and get started on that. I'm going to turn off the dev server. So if you're new to basic database concepts, things like SQL databases or non-relational databases like Mongo and whatnot, I'm going to briefly explain some of the core concepts, but we're not going to do a deep dive because that's pretty much a separate tutorial by itself. So I'm going to briefly cover the basic concepts and then show how it applies to this particular project. So in a database, you have types of data. So it might be like a profile, a project. We're going to use project today, or anything like that. And those data types are usually called models. And a model defines what goes into a data type. So a profile would have something like a name, an email, a description, or a bio. A project would have largely the same thing, a name, a description, an image, things like that. And those attributes are defined in the models and sometimes called the schemas. They're kind of interchangeable. A lot of people go schema or model. It's kind of the same difference. So in this folder right here called models, you'll see a few files already built in. And these models represent the database types that are already built into this particular project. Now, we're only going to use the project one, or this particular website, but we're only going to use the project one today so we can get a good sense of how everything comes together. So if you open up the project.js file, you will see some explanation text over here. You don't have to worry about that. And then down here, starting on line 13, you'll see a series of key value pairs called props, and these are the attributes that define the project data type or the project schema. This would be literally the schema right here. And so you can see how things are organized in terms of the data types that consist of the schema. So the image is a string, the name is a string, the category is a string. Pretty much all of these are strings except the timestamp, which is a date object. You can have more data types than strings, of course. You can have numbers, you can have another object itself, you can embed another object inside there, you can have an array, or what's called a Boolean, which is true or false. But this one in particular is really just a big collection of string key value pairs. And these attributes all together define the project schema or the project model. And so this would be called the project model in the database. Now, most database-driven projects on the web, or even things like mobile, like iOS or Android, are organized around what's called a model view controller architecture. And the model in the MVC architecture is this right here. These models are the M in the MVC, the model view controller. The view is also is what it sounds like. It's the views, and that's what we were working on in a previous few videos. These templates would be the views in the MVC style architecture. So the last thing that remains is the controller. The controllers are over here, and controllers are largely responsible for performing operations on database objects. So if you create a new profile, if you update a project, if you delete a project, things like that, that should normally happen inside of a controller. And the controller is where those sort of changes and updates generally happen. And within an MVC style architecture, those are the key responsibilities for each letter in the MVC. So if you open up the project controller, the one we're going to use today, you're going to see a series of functions. It looks like it's a bit much first, but it's pretty simple once you go through each function. And like I was saying, the controller is responsible for handling manipulations to the data. So in this project controller, this controller is responsible for handling database manipulations for the project model. So if we want to get a bunch of projects, if we want to fetch projects, that happens through this controller function called get. And there's a default function built in here. You can change this if you want, but for now we're just going to use a simple implementation. If we want to get a particular project, one specific project, if we know the project ID, we use this controller function get by ID, and we pass in the ID of the project, and this is the database ID. So in a database, every entry has its own unique identifier. If we want to create a project, that happens through this post command, and this post will create a new project based on a series of values we pass in inside this body parameter. So that would be like the name, an image maybe, things like that, a description most likely, and that would all be passed through into this body object right here, which would then populate the schema values defined over here. And continuing down this list, if we call the put command, this is an update command. So this will find a particular project based on the ID number passed in and update a set of values based on this parameters argument. Now you can update only one value or all the values, it doesn't matter. So this will only update the values that are passed in from the parameters object. And then finally we can delete. And this does exactly what it sounds like. It finds a project based on the ID number that's passed in, or the ID string, and it will remove that project, and then it will clear it out from the database. So that's what controllers are primarily responsible for doing. Obviously there's a lot more that you can do with them, but the point is it's important to understand where the logic should go inside of an MVC style architecture. One of the most common mistakes in this kind of architecture is where people mix responsibilities. So for example, in this project.js schema, it will be a mistake to insert something like a description template, like this project is tied to a certain project template in the views directory, and having having a template key like this template, and then denoting that as a string, as a string type, excuse me, and then putting in a template.mustache. I should say project.mustache. So I want to be very clear. This would be a mistake. This is what a lot of people do when they're first starting out, is they're mixing logic in their models and their views. And this would be an example of sort of a common beginner mistake when people are trying to get used to the MVC style architecture. The views logic should be completely self-contained, and the model logic should be completely self-contained. There should be no crossover between the two. The idea is this: if you take this project.js schema and move it over to another website, let's say you're doing another website that uses the same schemas, you can do that without worrying about the view templates over here causing any breakages or anything like that, because they don't have any codependencies. That's what you want. That's the most important principle of an MVC style architecture, which is pretty much the industry standard in these types of projects, web and mobile. So it's good to know. So let's explore how we can use this. So in the routes folder, we have our main route that we set up for the home page. So like I was saying earlier, we use the controllers to grab or to manipulate the data. So what we want to do is grab the project controller, which is from the controllers the controllers directory, and it's called project controller. And I'm going to just follow the case sensitivity here and do capital P, capital C. So we grab the project controller, and we want to use this controller to fetch all the projects currently in the database. So if you look at the project controller, it's very important to take note of the fact that this is a class. Okay, this is not a JSON object, a pure JSON object, it's a class. So what that means is we have to instantiate an instance of the class and then run these commands. So the way that looks is we do const project ctr equals new and then project controller, and now here is where we instantiate an instance of the project controller class. And this instance right here, this project controller instance right here on line 6, can now run all of these commands: get by ID, post, etc., put, delete. And those commands all return with a promise. So we do project controller dot get, and then that returns a promise, and every promise should have a catch block so that we can make sure we cover our errors. And in the success block of the promise, we get an array of projects. And then I'm going to put the data context object over here on top. It's really where it should be the whole time. And the render should happen in here in the success block. And just in case anything goes wrong, we should send back an error message. Oops. And then an error message, an error object should have a message associated with it, hopefully explaining something along the lines of what went wrong. And now this is a fetch for our projects. So what we're going to do here is console log projects. And this is called a query. So we're doing a fetch query. So projects. And now all we're doing with the payload, the results of the query, is we're just console logging it in the terminal. So we're not going to see it on the home page or anything like that. So let's go ahead back to our shell, our terminal, and let's run the dev server. Spelled it wrong. So turbo dev server. Okay, I'm going to clear that out. And when I load the home page right here, nothing changes visually here because we didn't make any visual changes. But take a look at the terminal. We now see a bunch of projects. Oh, well, really just a huge pile of JSON, but these are the projects currently in the local database. So we do have a bunch of projects already on here, stored locally. And so we can use these to render on the home page instead of what's hard-coded in here, which we will do in the next video. We're going to render these projects. Now, the key question is, where are these even coming from, right? So the database is a local database that's persistent on every individual website, and that's how the Turbo ecosystem works. And right now, that is those values are stored in this temp TMP directory right here underneath the projects DB. And notice how we have two others, one for the other data types. Nothing for subscriber because it didn't come built in this particular template. So if you open up the projects DB, you will see 6 projects, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And these are the ones that are built in by default. Now we can remove all these, which we're going to do, but these are the ones that are built in by default, just so that we can have some initial data to work with. And that's where this data is coming from. And that's how the local database works. And so in the next video, we are going to show how to manipulate this data. First, we're going to render it inside the actual home page right here. And then we're going to explore how to manipulate this data to actually use our own projects by removing these or updating these, all of the above. So before we wrap up, like we normally do, I'm going to turn off the server and do a turbo deploy just to make sure everything is still working. And once we confirm that, in the next video, we will actually show those projects here in the gallery section. Okay, the deployment is up. Let's take a look at the staging server. Now remember, we didn't make any visual changes, so it should look the same. So everything's the same, nothing changed visually, but it's important to know that inside the main JS route, we are now fetching all the projects currently in the temp database, in the TMP database right here, the local database, I should say. And so we now have the ability to render that inside this landing mustache template, which we will do in the next video. So that's it. Hopefully you got everything working. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hello, and welcome back to our Node.js and Express tutorial series here on Turbo 360. In the previous video, we set up a query, a fetch for our projects with the hope of rendering those projects on our landing template rather than a hard-coded list built into the HTML. So we ran the query, but we didn't render anything. So we're going to do that in this video and start showing the projects from the actual database rather than the hard-coded HTML. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'm here in the root level of the project, and I'm going to run the local dev server. And let's head over to localhost 3000. So here I am at localhost 3000, and this is what we had in the last video. So this is now going to be removed and replaced with the projects that are being queried from the database. So let's get that process in motion. So here is the console log showing all the projects from last time. I'm going to turn off the server and go back to the main.js route. Now, it's a little hard to see in the terminal, but you see this little brace right here? That square brace right there, or bracket, it's an indicator that this is an array. So what that means is this payload right here comes in the form of an array. So we can pass that array to the data object, this context data object right here, underneath the key called projects. And what this does is that this data object now passes all of the projects into the template right here on this render command. I'm going to get rid of this console log. So the template now has access to the projects in the projects key, and it's an array. So you may recall in one of the earlier videos we discussed how to loop through an array using the mustache templating engine. So let's go ahead and do that. So inside the landing mustache template, we have, let me just convert this to HTML. We have our hero section over here, and then scroll down to here, and we have our gallery, or really what's going to be our project section. And if you click on this div and then go down to where it closes, actually that's the wrong one, this one right here, this div right here, and scroll down to where it closes right here, this whole thing represents one project. And everything else after that represents the following projects. So if I take a look at this, it says portfolio and design. That's this one right here, portfolio and design. And here's the background image and whatnot. And then everything else follows that. So what we're going to do is remove all of the projects built into the HTML except the first one. So follow closely. I'm going to take this div right here and remove that project. And then take this right here. Whoa, did not mean to do that. Let's try that again. And then remove that project. And then basically keep doing this until all the projects are gone except the first one. So here is the last one. And now we're down to one hard-coded project in the landing template. And let's go ahead and run the dev server just to make sure that that's properly done. And that's what we want. Now we have only one project right here. And go ahead and turn off the server. So we're going to use this as sort of our project HTML. So remember in one of the earlier videos, we explored how to loop through an array in the Mustache templating engine. So we're going to do that right now. So we binded it underneath the projects key. So that's an array. So we do hashtag projects. And then down here, we do /projects. And what that means is this will be rendered for all the elements of the array in the projects array. So let's go ahead and try that out. So when I load the dev server, hopefully I'll see the same project show up multiple times. This should show up more than once now. And there it is. We have 6 built-in projects in the database. So now these are being rendered from the database. And what we want to do is see what data is available to us to populate each one of these divs. So if we look at the schema or the model from the previous video, so project.js in the models directory, we have an image property, a name property, category, slug, preview, a lot of stuff we can use here. The image is probably the most suitable for the background image. So let's go here, and here's the div for each individual project. And here is the image. So we can just put image. And now when I reload the main page, the images are now different because every project has its own image. And then we have also the name. So that will be right here, name. And the reason I know that that's an available option is, again, if I go back to the schema, the model, I can see what the options are. And then when I reload, I now have different names. And then category would probably be most suitable for that subtext. So that would be right here, category. And then reload that. And then now we're seeing, well, almost all of them are the same category, but here's development and then marketing and SEO, design, design, design. And great. So now these projects are being rendered from the database. It's very important to understand that. So what we can do next is, let's see here, I'm going to configure this text and this subtext to use the template, the configuration JSON file. So going back to the main.js, okay, going back to the main.js, we're using the landing template, which means we want to go to the landing config file. And I'm going to create a new entry called projects. Inside that entry, I'm going to create 2 sub-entries, one called header for the header text, and that will be projects, or let's go with my projects, and then let's go with subheader. Take a look at my most recent work. Okay, and then we can now get rid of this gallery object because we're replacing it with the projects entry. So if we go back to the landing.mustache, where it says gallery, we can take that out. And remember, it's the page key, that's the default, and then projects, and then header. So the page key is what's provided to us by Turbo automatically inside this route. So don't forget that. And then if I reload, after I relaunch the dev server, actually it's still running, so it now says my projects. And then I can go into this lorem ipsum text right here and remove that and replace it page.projects. projects, and then subheader, I believe is what we called it. Let me just make sure about that. Subheader, great. And then let's reload that. Take a look at my most recent work. Terrific. And then this is now coming from the database. So let's go ahead and deploy this and make sure everything still works on the server. Now don't forget, we made changes to the page configuration file, landing.json. So we need to do two things here. We need to do turbo page landing to update the configuration file. And then we need to do turbo deploy, and that will redeploy the project. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look. So let's grab the staging URL, copy and paste that into the browser. And now we have my projects. Take a look at my most recent work, and this is now being fetched from the database. It's very important to recognize the distinction, although everything looks the same, but the data is now dynamic. So we can update the database here using what's called a content management system, or CMS for short, which will then update this data. So real quick, I'm going to make a quick change to the page configuration. So if I go back to the landing.json and I put an exclamation mark right here, I can do turbo page and then landing to post that change. And then I should reload here, and that change has been affected right away. And that's great. And in the next video, I'm going to show you how to actually change the data on the back end, the database, so that we can manipulate these to be using our actual work rather than what comes built in with the template automatically. So our project, our website is starting to take some shape here. The data is now dynamic, and in the next video we will start customizing that dynamic data, and I'll show you how to work with the built-in database to make your website fully customized. So hopefully you got everything working. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hello, and welcome back to our Node.js and Express tutorial series here on Turbo 360. In the previous video, we fetched our projects from the local database and then rendered those projects on our landing template. But as I'm sure you've noticed, those aren't really our projects. Those are the projects that came pre-installed with the theme, the template. So that's not going to work, obviously. We want to create our own projects, which we are going to do in this video using a built-in feature called the content management system, which enables us to create entities using a visual editing tool. And then we can then grab those entities and load them into our project. So we're going to do that next. So let's go ahead and get started. So here I am in the root level of my project as of the end of the previous video. I'm going to run the dev server and make sure everything still works fine. So here I am on localhost 3000. Here's the hero section we set up, and then here are the projects that we rendered in the previous video. And these are now loading from the local database. But now we need a way to change this data into our own data. So what we do is we use the content management system that comes built in on the Turbo project, the Turbo site, which makes it very easy to create and update entities and delete entities. So let's go ahead and open that up on your Turbo account. So you head over to your account on Turbo, and then click on your account page and click on Sites right here. And then look for the site that corresponds to this project. And so for me, that's this one right here. And you want to click on Manage. And here's where you can change the name and add a description and things like that. But we're not going to worry about that. We want to click on Configuration. And here you'll see your site loaded in a visual editor. And what we want to do is click on CMS for Content Management System. So you click on that, and here is where you can update the database essentially. So you'll see a basic CMS here, and you can select your data type on the upper right corner. So we have project, post, and service. And that should match up with the data types in our code base, the models. We have project, post, and service. And you see subscriber here as well, but the reason why you don't see that on the CMS is because it's not in the controller index. It's basically not exported. So frankly, this may as well not be here, but we're going to leave it behind for now, just because it's already there. So here is the data loaded into the CMS. And if I click on project, or if I click on post on the left-hand side, you'll see this column reload with the current entries underneath that collection. These are called collections. So I'm going to go back to project, and here we have a bunch of projects that are preloaded with the template. And these are the ones that just came pre-installed, and we don't want these. So we want to remove these, and we want to add our own projects instead. So what I'm going to do is show you how to remove one. So here's the first one, and then simply scroll to the bottom and click delete project, and that's it. And now it's gone. And now we have these remaining ones. If you click on the next one, I forgot to point out that these fields, you may notice, match up with the schema in the model of our code. So if we go back to our code and click on the project model, you'll see name over here, well, the image is over here, category, preview, link, client, etc. But you don't see all of them here. For example, you don't see this one called slug. And if you look at the actual schema, you'll see an optional attribute on the schema called immutable, which means it cannot be changed. And if the immutable flag is set to true, that means it will not show up in the CMS, basically preventing anyone from changing its value. So by having an immutable flag set to true, it doesn't show up here. A couple other flags on the schema also determine how it shows up on the CMS. So for example, there is a description attribute down here, and you may notice that there's an isHTML true flag. And if that flag is set to true, you'll see down here the description gives you a full editing module for the description because this is loaded as HTML. And that's how you determine how it shows up in the CMS. There are a series of other options which we'll get to in a later video, but those are the most basic ones. So let's go ahead and continue removing a couple of these default projects. So let's go ahead and delete this one, and then let's click on the next one, and then I'm going to leave one behind. And what we want to do now is create our own projects. So that's pretty simple. We select add project, and then we fill out the fields for our project. So just a forewarning, I already selected a few images. I have 3 images here that I selected from unsplash.com. I'm sorry, .co, unsplash.co. And this is a nice resource for odious.com, sorry. And this is a nice resource for getting nice looking high-res images. So this is pretty good for just getting some images for your projects. So I already selected 3 of those. I'm going to create one project right now using this image right here. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to click on change image. And then on the desktop, we have images and then art gallery. And then let's fill it out. Art gallery, let's say design. This is an art gallery website I designed for a local art gallery. I'm going to leave the link blank for now. Client art gallery. 2018 to 2019. And for the description, I'm going to use some lorem ipsum, just placeholder text, just to make it a little easy. So I'm going to find some lorem ipsum generator. And I like this one right here, lorem ipsum, loreipsum.net, just because it makes it very easy to just copy to the clipboard. And this gives us some just pre-formatted HTML, like hyperlinks and bold text and things like that. So it's nothing, nothing crazy. And then we just paste that in here. And now we have some HTML in our description. And we filled out the fields, at least the ones that we want to use for this, this site. And we go ahead and create the project. And that will then create the project and load it right here in the editor. And that's it. Now, the thing to remember here is that we are updating the staging environment, which is not the same as local. So if I load the project on localhost 3000, nothing's going to change because the site loads the data from the temp directory that I explained in the previous video down here. So this hasn't changed because we didn't change anything locally. We only changed things on staging. So it's very easy to correct this. So what we do is we turn off the server and we run what's called an npm script. And scripts, npm scripts, are found in the package.json. Underneath the scripts entry. And we're going to run this script right here called reset, not clean, reset, which will basically reset the temp directory. It'll just remove the contents of the temp directory. So npm run reset, and that will wipe out the entries in the temp directory. So now this is empty. And the reason we did that is because when the temp directory is empty and we load the site on local, it'll look for the database entries, and if it doesn't find them, it will fetch them from the staging environment, basically what we just did. So what we can do now is turbo dev server, and our project's database has been wiped out, and it will then fetch it from the staging environment because it doesn't know, it won't be loaded on local, so it can only go to staging next. So if I reload the site now, I see my art gallery and the only one that I left behind, and that's it. So now we have art gallery and then the one that I left behind from before. So as you can see, the CMS makes life a lot easier in terms of adding data and updating. We can make changes here if we want. We can change the data. We can update. We can change the image, things like that. And the CMS tool on our projects makes that a lot easier. Otherwise, we'd have to create our own dashboard just for the sake of updating and adding new database-driven content. So now that we've done that, we can add as many projects as we want. So rather than do another one, I'm sure you picked up the process. I encourage you to do a couple more on your own at the end of this video so that you get a feel for how this works. And then don't forget to run a clean npm run reset on local so that it'll pull down those changes. Now, one last thing we're going to do, as usual, is deploy to the server so that we can make sure all the changes are reflected on the staging environment as well as localhost. Okay, the staging is deployed. Let's go ahead and copy and paste that into a new tab. And now we see the same thing. And so everything looks accurate. Everything is rendering properly. One thing I did notice, if you can pick up, is that this image right here looks a little bit squished. It looks like it's vertically being squeezed as opposed to this image right here, the original one right here. So what that means is this aspect ratio is being distorted on this actual render, which is not good. So we want to fix that. And this is where the image hosting platform on Turbo becomes very convenient. So what we want to do is head over to the landing template mustache file. And if you look for the image for each project right here on line 47, you'll notice that it's rendering the raw image in its entirety, but the image itself might not be a perfect square as is required by the space. Also, the image itself might be very, very large. It might be like 5,000 pixels across. We don't want that. So we want to take advantage of the cropping and scaling tools that the image platform provides us by doing equals S, and then let's go with 650, and then -C to guarantee that it's a perfect square crop. So now what I'm going to do is run the dev server, and then I'm going to reload this in a separate tab. The reason being that we can compare directly the two renderings side by side. And so here's how it looks now, where things don't seem so squished together. And here's how it looks over here, where the image itself is distorted and squeezed vertically. The aspect ratio is distorted, and that's not good. We much prefer this one because this maintains the natural proportions of the image, and it comes out looking a lot nicer. So this is where we can really take advantage of the tools provided to us by the platform to make our life a lot easier. Otherwise, oftentimes what I see in other projects in other environments are developers who they upload multiple versions of the same image, which can get very, very onerous over time. It can get very annoying to upload 3, 4, or 5 versions of an image every single time. Or sometimes what happens is they create a process where when an image is uploaded once, it gets thrown into a processing function which generates multiple versions of the same image on demand. That would be another way it's commonly handled, but that's far from a beginner tool, from a beginner technique. And so this platform makes that process a lot easier. So yeah, that's it. I'm not going to deploy that change. I'm sure you can gather what happened here, but that's it. Hopefully you got everything working. And what we're going to do in the next video is we're going to add more, fill out the home page some more, and add a little bit more dynamic data as well. So hopefully you got everything working. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hello, and welcome back to our Node.js and Express tutorial series here on Turbo 360. In the previous video, we took advantage of the CMS system built into Turbo to create our own projects and then render our own projects on our site, obviously, which is better than the default projects that come with the template. So now that we have our own project showing up on the home page, what we're going to do in this video is create a dedicated page for each project. So if somebody visits your site and they want to learn more about a particular project, you can direct them to an actual page for that individual project. So let's get into it. So here I am in the root level of my portfolio site, the portfolio project. I'm going to run the dev server as I usually do and make sure everything is still working properly. And let's open up localhost 3000 and make sure it looks good. Okay, great. So here's what we did last time. And what we want to do in this video is when a user clicks on this link right here or this one, it goes to a page that's dedicated for this entire project. So let's go ahead and set that up. So I'm turning off the server here, Control C. And then if you look in the code base in the views directory, you'll see that there's already a project template that comes pre-installed with the project when you download the site. So we're going to take advantage of this so that we're not designing everything from the bottom up. Otherwise, this would become more of a design tutorial. But it's a pretty simple template, as you can see. It just uses Bootstrap to set up a column and one big row for showing the project image and description. More importantly is the actual placeholders. You'll see that there's a project reference here in the mustache placeholders, rendering the image and the description and the category, things like that. So basically what that means is when we render this template, it's expecting a project data object in the data that's passed to the template. So that's pretty much our only responsibility in rendering this template. So let's go ahead and set this guy up. So if you look at the landing.mustache that we set up in the previous video, where we render the projects in this iteration here, this loop, you'll see on line 44 that there's an anchor tag that goes to the following slash project slash and then a hard-coded value here. This hard-coded value right here is called the slug. And a slug is basically a unique identifier for the project or really any entity. So it could be like a blog post or a profile or anything like that. The reason we're using the slug rather than the actual database ID is because it's bad practice to expose database IDs in an actual front end. So we're using a slug, which also has other benefits, like it's readable, it's human readable, it has SEO benefits, things like that. So what we want to do is we want to remove the hard-coded value here and implement the slug. We want to render the slug instead. And you may recall from one of the earlier videos that the slug is an immutable value right here. That means the user cannot change it on the editing dashboard. It doesn't even show up. So the slug is automatically assigned when the project is created. And if you're curious as to how that happens, you may recall that those things happen in the controllers. So if you look at the project controller on the create command, which is post, you'll see that on line 50 and 51, this slug is being assigned by using a variation on the name of the project. So the slug is automatically assigned when the project is created, and it cannot be edited. So it doesn't show up on the actual dashboard, the admin dashboard. So that's a quick intro on how the slug is created and what it is. Now here is the route that we're going to use to render the individual project page. So let's head over to our main.js route and set that up. So here is our home page route, which for now is just about done. Let's set up another route, another get route, because this is a get request, and it's going to be project. And now we're going to use a request parameter, which is denoted by this colon right here, and then the parameter is going to stand for the slug, and then we're going to pass in our usual request response object. And let's go ahead and grab the context from the request. Now here, this colon right here represents a request parameter, which means it could be any string that we can then pull out inside of our response handler. So we can grab the project slug from the request params object and then the slug variable, which represents this value right here. And just to show you how that works for now, I'm just going to send back the slug. Actually, I want to send it back like this. Slug equals project slug. Just so you can see how it works. So I'm going to run the dev server. And here's localhost 3000, but if I do project and then 123, you'll see the slug equals 123, and then ABC, so forth and so on. If I click on these actual links, it'll link to the slug passed through from the actual project itself. And this is going to be our unique identifier. So what we want to do now is run a query against the project controller using the slug that's passed through the URL. So what we want to do is grab the project controller, which is a new instance of the project controller. And then now we want to run a query, but this time we want to pass in query parameters. So what we do is we pass in an object and then the name of the filter that we want to query against, and then that we pass in the value. So if you look at the controller, we are using this command right here, but we're passing in request parameters. And this is very simple. It's just a JSON object where we pass in the attribute that we want to filter against. So in this case, we want to grab every project whose slug matches the value passed in the URL. And this is going to return an array of projects. And then also we want to handle the catch scenario just in case anything goes wrong. And for now, I'm just going to send back a simple oops. And then error message. Okay. Now, if the array here has a length of 0, that means there was no project found whose slug matches this value. In other words, the project doesn't exist. So what we want to do is we want to throw an error and say project not found, and then return so that the code stops in that spot. It doesn't go any further. So this is a scenario where maybe the URL is malformed or the user mistyped it, something like that, and the project won't be found. If the length is greater than 0, then what we want to do is we want to grab the first element of the array, just assuming that that's the one that we want, and then we take the data object and then we assign the value, the key, as project, like that, because then this project data will be passed into the template under the project key. And you may recall, if you look at the project template, that's the key it expects. So this is basically the core responsibility here, to make sure we pass in the actual project data under the project key in the context object. And then we just render the project template. And don't forget to pass in the context object. And that should do it. So let's go ahead and give it a shot and see what happens. All right, let's open this guy up on localhost 3000. And let's click on this guy right here. Whoop. So we still have it rendering the send command. So the reason that happened is because right here, I forgot to remove the original response. So it sent the original response before it even got to the rest of that code. That's a simple, silly mistake. Let's go ahead and remove that original test response. And then let's try it again. Okay, I'm going to go back to the home page. And then we're going to reload and then click on this. And now we have the page set up for the individual project. And you may recall from the previous video, we entered a description using the lorem ipsum text from that website, and that is being rendered here with the proper hyperlinks and everything. So the actual HTML for the description is properly showing up in here. And if I go back and click on the other one, same thing. So now we have individual pages for our projects, and also just to be really sure, let's test the error scenario. So if I put in a slug value here that's clearly non-existent, it'll say, oops, project not found, and that's the error here that's being thrown. So basically, when you throw an error here, it goes right to the catch block, and that's how it works inside of a promise, what's called a promise chain. This is a promise sequence. Excuse me. This right here is a promise sequence, and this then right here is one part of the chain. And if any part of the chain breaks, you can just throw in error, and then it'll go right to the catch block, and that's what we're seeing right here. So, so yeah, that's it. We have our project page now showing. So if a user visits your home page, if a visitor checks out your home page and thinks looks at this project and thinks, oh, this looks interesting. I wonder what this is all about. They can click on here and get a better description. So so yeah, that's it. Let's go ahead and deploy this to make sure it works on staging as well. Okay, the deployment is now up. Let's go ahead and copy and paste that into our browser. And let's head down here and check the projects. And great, so now we have the project showing up on the staging as well, and everything looks good. And just one more small detail I should point out is that in this new route that we set up for the individual project page, notice how in the pages folder there's no project.json file. There's no config file that corresponds to this, and that's okay. So you don't have to have a config file that corresponds to this every single page. It's fine if you don't. But if we do have a project.json config file, this system will fetch that config file and then add it to the data object here, this data context object right here under the page key. So it's up to you whether or not you want to use it. Totally up to you. And in this case, we didn't need it because the project page is pretty simple. It's pretty sparse. There isn't much here, and we're just using the partials instead. So so that's it. Hopefully you got everything working, and I'll see you in the next video. Hello, and welcome back to our Node.js and Express tutorial series here on Turbo 360. In the previous video, we set up an individual page for each project so that if users want to see more detail about a particular project, they can navigate to that page. In this video, we're going to continue filling out the home page a little bit more and set up a form so that if anyone wants to contact you, if anyone wants to work with you, there will be a means to do that. And we will set up a contact submission form so that anyone can reach out to you. So let's go ahead and get started. So as usual, I am in the root directory and I'm going to run the dev server. And let's head over to localhost and make sure everything still works properly. And let's click on the project, and it looks good. So what we're going to do next is fill this out a little bit more. We're going to add a few more blocks that comes pre-installed, and then we're going to add a contact submission form. So speaking of blocks, let's go ahead and open a new tab and head over to the blocks page that comes pre-installed with these Turbo templates. And let's fill out a few more sections just to add a little bit more content on the home page. So I'm scrolling down to the bottom here. You might want to add testimonials on your own later on. I'm going to add this services block right here. I think it would look nice to have a services section right beneath the projects. I think that's a natural spot for that. So let's head over to the blocks template right here. And if you look at the partials that are being used here, you'll see that there's one called service. So there's a service partial inside the partials and then blocks subdirectory, and that's this right here. And here's the service partial that's being used to render this section right here. And if you take a look at that partial, you'll see that it's referencing the page data context object, so we do need to pass in the context object and a service section within that. So let's make sure that that's in place before we continue. So if we look at the pages folder, we have a service section inside the blocks configuration file. So let's go ahead and find that. And that's right here. So this chunk of JSON right here is what is providing the image content for the service section right here. So let's go ahead and copy and paste that over into our landing configuration file. And while we're here, let's get rid of all the stuff that we used in the earlier videos as sample data, because we're done with that. And then let's paste the service section into here. So now that data is available in our landing.json configuration file. So let's grab the service partial, or the service block, whatever you want to call it. That's these 55 lines of code. And let's head over to our landing template and paste it in right here beneath the projects. So now we should be able to reload the home page and see the services down here. And it's fetching from the section, the config file right here. And the config file only supports the images. So in reality, what you should do as a sort of an exercise after this video is convert each one of these into its own JSON object inside the service configuration section. So for example, it would be, one would be web development. So web development, and then text web development, description, and then image one, or feature. And then you fill this out with some text and then the image URL, and then that should be rendered here instead from here. That's one way you can do it. Another way is you can just have the services inside the service block. You can have a services array, and this might be the better way to do it. List, and then have an array of JSON objects. Name, web development, and then paste in the image, and then description, etc., etc. And then inside here, instead of having a separate entry for each service, you do a loop like we did in one of the earlier videos. That's probably the better way to handle it, to be honest. So in an exercise on your own, you should go ahead and try that. I'm not going to get into it here because we've already covered that conceptually. So I'm going to just leave this behind as it is. And I'm going to move on to a contact form now. So beneath the services section, I want to add a contact form, providing the user a way to reach you if he wants to work with you. So right here we have another block with a couple contact forms, 4 in this case. I'm just going to use the first one because that's fine. So right here, and so we're going to head over to the blocks page, and the partial for that is contact. So let's open that up from the partials blocks subdirectory, and contact is the one that we are referencing right now. And I'm just going to pick the first one. So that's a section right here. And then just grab the first section. And if you look at the partial, you see there's no reference to page or anything like that. So all of this right now is hard-coded. So let's go ahead and head over to our landing template. And down here, let's just paste it in. And let's reload the home page. and now we have this. So now we have a form that's already in here, let's update the config file a little bit so that we can change it. So let's add a new entry in the landing config called contact. And let's create a key called header. And let's work together, or let's collaborate. And then subheader, if you're interested in working with me, fill out the form below and I will get back to you right away. Okay, and let's use this as the content to fill this out. So we have a new entry in the config called contact, which has a header and a subheader. So we go to our landing template, and inside the contact form, right here, we do page and then contact and then header. And then remove all this placeholder text. And then we do page.contact.subheader. And that should render the contents from the landing configuration file. I think that's how you spell collaborate. We'll just go with that for now. And then here we have that. And then this is now looking more more like we want it for our particular site. And we lost some padding down here. Let's go ahead and fix that right now. So because it's such a simple fix, we'll just take care of it right away. So here is the contact section. This is using Bootstrap 4. So what we can do is add some margin on the bottom, and MB stands for margin bottom, and then it's on a scale of 1 to 5, where 5 is the most. So it's not a big deal. I'm just throwing that in there to make it easier, and that'll take care of that. Okay, now we did make a change to the landing config file. Very important to remember that. So what we need to do is do turbo, page, and then landing. And that will post those changes to the staging environment so that when we deploy to our staging environment, those changes will be on the server as well. And then we can confirm that this is showing up properly on staging, hopefully. All right, let's take a look and see what we get. Okay, copy and paste that. And here we have the services and the let's collaborate, and this is all looking good. Okay, and I'm going to make a quick change here. We're going to do name, email, and instead of password, because this is not a sign-up form, it's going to be name, email. Make that into a text input, and then I guess message will be what we go with here. And we're going to call that send. Okay, we're not going to deploy this because it's just such a simple change, but what we're going to do in the next video is we're going to connect this form so that users can actually can contact you and something will happen. So in the next video, we're actually going to hook this up so that a person can actually fill this out, and then you will actually have that data on the actual staging server, the actual CMS. It goes to the CMS so that you can see when people actually do reach out to you and you can follow up. So that's it. Hopefully you got everything working. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hello, and welcome back to our Node.js and Express tutorial series here on Turbo 360. In the previous video, we set up a contact form on the home page so that it's possible for anyone who wants to collaborate with you, they can contact you. But we did not connect it. So in this video, we're going to do just that. We're going to connect it to our CMS so that when people do reach out to you, you can find out on your CMS editing dashboard on the Turbo staging environment. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to run the dev server, and as usual, make sure everything still works. Okay, and here are the projects. Here's the services section we also set up in the last video, and then the contact form. So let's go ahead and start building that out. So let's open up the code. Okay, and in the landing template right here, the contact form is on the bottom. This is what we set up last time. So what we're going to do is connect this to a submission handler using JavaScript on the front end, and in particular jQuery and AJAX calls to make API requests to our server. So that's normally done down here in the bottom of the body tag right here. And you'll see that there's already a scripts partial being loaded into the bottom of the body tag. So if I open up that scripts partial right here, you'll see that there's a couple of JavaScript files already being loaded in these two. So we're going to add our own JavaScript file to capture the contact form submission and then send it to our server. So we're going to do that right here. So let's get rid of these and add our own script. And this is going to load a JavaScript function. And that function will be called on the initial page load. So what we can do now is do a console log. Oh, this shouldn't be showing up. Don't worry about this. We'll do a console log. And let's see if that shows up on the client side, the browser, when we load the home page. So if I open edit the Chrome Dev Tools, so that's Option Command I, and then reload the home page, we now see a hello message that comes from our script tag that we just entered right here. And here we can do some client-side logic, some front-end logic. So we're going to do that using jQuery, and we're going to send an AJAX call to our server when someone submits this send button, when somebody hits that send button. So let's go ahead and bind a click handler to this send button. So what I'm going to do first is create an ID attribute on this button, and button submit contact. Actually, let's go with contact submit. And we're going to use jQuery to grab that button submit contact. So this is how you grab an ID, an attribute by ID tag. Don't forget that hashtag right here. And then we're going to bind a click handler, and that click handler takes a function argument which takes an event parameter. And right now we don't want the event to actually execute. So the way we do that is we do prevent default, and this will prevent the form from executing when the user presses the submit button. And then the next thing I'm going to do is console log contact form submitted. And let's go ahead and see if we get that console log when I reload the page. So right here, contact form submitted, and notice how nothing happened. That's because we did a prevent default. If we didn't do that, the actual form would submit and that would actually crash because the form doesn't go anywhere. There's no actual destination for the form data. So what we're doing here is we're preventing it from submitting, and then we're going to capture the values that have been typed into these fields. So what we're going to do next is make sure that that capture is taking place. So for each one of these input fields, name, email, and message, we're going to assign an ID attribute for each one of those. So ID, contact, form, name, and then of course there's email and message. So go ahead and just copy and paste those in. Now what we can do is on the actual submit, we can create a visitor object who has a name, an email, and a message. And each one of these fields can be filled out by the actual value of the input. So we use the same jQuery syntax for this, contact form name, and we grab the value of that input field. So here we're grabbing the contact form name input, and that is this guy right here. And then we're going to grab the value that's typed in and assign that to the visitor name field. So we can actually do that for the other two as well. We can do here email and here message. And when we submit the form, we can just console log that for now. Like that. And then when I reload the page, I can fill this out. Bob at gmail.com. I want to hire you. And then send. And now we have all the data showing up right here, which is exactly what we want. And I'm going to get rid of this hello because we've already confirmed it. Okay. The question now becomes, what do we do with this data? Where do we send it? So if you look at the actual models folder of our project, you'll see we have 4 models already pre-installed. We're using project already. Post is blog posts. Service we didn't really use, but you can if you want to fill out the services section with CMS data rather than hard-coded page config data. It's up to you. And then there's subscriber, which we didn't use at all. And furthermore, it's not even exposed in the controllers. So if you look at the controllers index, we're not even exporting it at all. So let's go ahead and implement that, the subscriber controller. And then we want to export it in this right here underneath the subscriber key. Subscriber. And if you look at the subscriber model, you'll see we have a first name, email, subject, message, etc. I'm going to change the first name to just name. And then this will be the value that gets posted to the server when we submit this form. So we have now a data model and schema that supports this object that we're going to send to the server. The question is, how do we actually send it to the server? So with this template, as with most templates that you can download off of Turbo, it comes with a built-in API router. And if you look at right here in the app.js file, we have an API route that already is connected to a built-in router from the Vertex router object down here. Now, this is a simple REST API that basically proxies all requests to the controllers using using these HTTP commands. So a get by ID, post, put, etc. So in other words, if I want to look at all the current projects in our backend, in our database, we can use the API for that. If I go to localhost/API/project, we now see 2 projects currently in the backend rendered as pure JSON. And here we have the ID on the payload. So following API structure architecture, I can append this with slash and then the ID number, and then I will get only that one project I specified. And right now what I'm doing is I'm just hitting the API endpoint, which then sends a request to the controller, in this case for projects. So I'm just making these requests using the API. Now you may remember in one of the earlier videos we said the post request is the one that creates a new entry. And so we're going to use that to create a new subscriber using this post request right here by sending an HTTP post request to the API for subscriber. And if you take a look at the subscriber endpoint, you'll see that we have one test subscriber already in there that came with a template. But let's go ahead and create another one using the API post handler. And right now we're using a concept called a REST API. And there's a lot more that goes into it. I'm just sort of explaining the very basic details right now to get this project working. But REST API theory and general structure and overall has a lot more to it that's worth looking into. So you should definitely look at the Turbo website for that. We have a lot of tutorials on how to handle REST APIs and how to create them. But what's important to understand here is that the post request creates a new entry depending on which resource, which data type we're accessing. And we're going to send a post request from here using an AJAX query from the jQuery library. So let's go ahead and do that. So we do $AJAX, and here I'm sending an AJAX request, and that takes a URL argument. That's going to be to API/subscriber. So this is sending a request to API subscriber. However, we don't want to send a GET request. We want to send a POST request. So we do that by adding a type field, which tells the AJAX request to send a POST request. And then we want to send a data object with that. And that's simply the visitor. And that's this right here, which will pass through a name, an email, and a message. And then we have 2 completion handlers, a success block, which takes a function, and the function takes a response as well as a couple other things. And then we also want to add an error block in case something goes wrong. That's an error completion handler, excuse me. And then that also takes a response as well as a couple other things like error codes and stuff like that. For now, we're only going to focus on the success block and the response argument within it. There's a lot more that can be used here, but we just want to get the bare essentials working in this tutorial. So what we're going to do next is we're just going to console log and then subscriber created. And then let's see what we get on the callback. When the form is submitted. So again, just to be clear what's happening here, we are grabbing the field values and creating a visitor object out of it with a name, an email, and a message parameter for using the field values, input field values. And then we're going to send that via AJAX request to API subscriber as a post request. And that will then take the subscriber controller and send a post request with the body, which is the visitor that we passed in, and this will then create that subscriber and then return it back to the AJAX request, hopefully as a success callback. And then at that point, we will just see a console log right here. And that's what's happening right here. And we're using the built-in REST API to make that happen. So again, if this REST API, this line 24, this API path wasn't connected, none of this would work. So you want to leave that behind for that reason. So let's go ahead and test it out. So let's go back here and reload the home page. And then let's type in bob@gmail.com. I want to hire you. And then let's hit send. And now we have subscriber created. And you'll see that there are more keys here than that we actually typed in. For example, there's an ID object that's coming from the database. Here we have the name, the email, message, I want to hire you, and a couple other things like the date, the timestamp when it was created. So if I go back here to the API endpoint, I can reload that, and now we have Bob, I want to hire you, subscriber, etc. It's very important to remember that this is only happening on local. So we're on localhost right now, so none of this is happening on staging. So if you go on the staging environment, you won't see any of this until we deploy. So before we do that, the one last thing we're going to do is take this script tag that we wrote and put it into its own external file, which is best practice. So if you look at the scripts partial right here and open that up, you'll see that these are being referenced from an external file. And that's really what we should do too. And these external files, these static files, are stored in the public directory. This is one of the earlier things we pointed out is that the static files are stored in a public folder, excuse me, and then inside the public folder we have a JS directory. And in the JS directory is where we should enter our JS file. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn off the server, and we're going to cd into the public directory, and then into the JS folder, and then we're going to create a contact JS file, and then here it is right here, and then we're going to go back to our landing template, and we're going to grab everything inside the script tag that we just wrote, and then we're going to cut it, we're going to pull it out and paste it into the contact file. That's really where it should be, the contact.js. And then we head back to the script tag, and now we can just import that file. Now notice here we don't use the prefix public. We don't need to do that because the public is by default the static asset folder. So and again that's configured in the app.js all the way up on top, actually right here on line 8. So if this wasn't set, then this wouldn't work. So we don't need the public. So here this should now reference the contact.js file over here that we just copied and pasted. So let's go ahead and confirm that by running the dev server. Going to cd back to the root directory, don't forget that. And then let's load the home page. And now I'm going to load the source code and scroll to the bottom, and you'll see that we have the contact form right here, the contact.js file, excuse me. And then if I click on that, you'll see the code that we just wrote for that. And then we can test it one more time. So I'm going to do mike@gmail.com, and then I want to hire you too. And then send that. And now we have a new subscriber created. And then if we reload the API endpoint for this, I want to hire, there's Mike, where it says I want to hire you too. And so everything is now working properly on local. So let's go ahead and send this to our staging environment and see if it works on staging. So let's go ahead and send that up. Turbo. Let's try it again. Okay, worked that time. Not sure what happened the first time, but sometimes you just need to try it again and the deployment then goes up. Let's go ahead and head over to our staging environment. And I'm going to load the dev tools, and I'm going to create a new contact submission. So let's do Joe, joe@gmail.com, and then do you do iOS development? Okay, and then send that. And then now we have subscriber created. We have the callback that we're seeing on local. And now the question is, where can we see it on our admin dashboard? So keep in mind, we're just accessing the CMS here. So if I open up Turbo, my account on Turbo, and click on Sites, this is the project that corresponds to what we're working on. I click on Manage, and then Configuration. And then on the CMS, over here where we worked with these projects earlier in an earlier video, on the upper right corner, we now have a new data type called subscriber. And here we have two subscribers, the first test entry, and then Joe, which is the one that we just submitted. So when we're accessing the API and making calls to the API, we're interfacing with the CMS, and this is how that's happening. So hopefully you got all that working. I'm going to make one more small adjustment because it's worth pointing out. If you open up the source code and go to the bottom where we added our contact form, contact.js file, notice how the other JavaScript files have this long prefix associated with it. And this is what's called a Content Delivery Network, a CDN. And what a CDN does for you is that it takes your static assets and it globally distributes them to what's called edge locations, servers that are located around the world, really, to make the delivery of those assets faster for anyone who's accessing your website in a different part of the planet. So if someone's going to this website, let's say in Asia, and I'm deploying this right now in the United States, then these files should be delivered from a server closer in Asia rather than the US. But right now, that's not happening for this file right here because we did not link it to the CDN. So the CDN is provided to us for free by Turbo. It's automatically built in, but we're not using it. So the way you access the CDN is if you look at the scripts partial, you'll see it just says CDN automatically right here. And the reason that is because in the actual route file where we serve this page right here, part of the context is the CDN. In the context provided to us, one of the other values is the CDN. So all we need to do to adjust that is simply do the same thing, CDN, like that. And it'll be there by virtue of the context object provided by the environment. So this is a worthwhile change because you do want to deliver all your static assets via a CDN. That's much better practice. It's considered much more professional. So this is a worthwhile adjustment to deploy. And once that's up and we confirm it, that will wrap it up for this tutorial series. Okie dokie, let's try it again. Okay, everything looks good. Now remember, we're just checking to see if the JavaScript file is being serviced via the CDN, which it now is. So now this is coming directly from the CDN, and this is being rendered from a server physically closest to my current location. But if you're watching this from, let's say, Australia, then you're seeing this from a server physically closer to your location. And that's much more of a professional way of architecting your projects, organizing your projects. So Turbo provides that CDN to you for free. You want to take advantage of it, why not? Because it's already there. And hopefully you got all this working. And this is going to wrap up this tutorial series, but there's a lot more that can be explored in this Node Express environment. It's a very powerful framework, as well as the Turbo environment that makes this all work seamlessly. If you want to head over to turbo360.co and check out all of our other tutorials on these frameworks and libraries and tools, you can find them all over here. And that's it. So thanks for watching, and hopefully you got everything working. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email. My email is dquan@turbo360.co, and I will get back to you as quickly as I can. So thanks again, and I'll see you in the next tutorial series.